Good evening. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the RIBA. I'm Alan Jones, President of the Royal Institute of British Architects. Before we begin, in terms of some housekeeping, please note that we are actually recording the event this evening, so you don't, well, it actually says here that recording of tonight's event is strictly forbidden. Okay, and you will soon be able to catch it on our website, architecture.com. So I'd kindly ask you to switch off your mobile phones and just sit back and enjoy tonight's wonderful lecture. In a few moments, we will call to the stage tonight's award winner and speaker, but before we do, I'd like to add my own very warm welcome on behalf of the RIBA to the recipient of the 2019 Charles Jencks Award, Débora, Mesa and Antón García-Abril from Ensamble Studio. The Charles Jencks Award is given to an individual or practice who has made a major contribution simultaneously to the theory and practice of architecture, and the RIBA Charles Jencks Award has permeated the work of talented architects such as Alejandro Aravena, Bernadetta Tagliabue, Rem Koolhaas, Charles Correa, Zaha Hadid, Herzog and de Meuron, to name a few. This year's winner, Ensemble Studio, led by Débora, Mesa and Antón García-Abril, is, without a doubt, a very deserving addition to this illustrious list. We will hear more about their remarkable career shortly. The RIBA is, as ever, tremendously grateful to the designer, author and broadcaster Charles Jencks for donating the funds that created this award. Through his work, his writing, and his commitment to the benefits of great architecture and landscape, Charles was an inspiration to architects for many years. To say a few more words about the award and its history, I would now like to invite Lily Jencks to the stage. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and welcome. So I know we want to get quickly to the Awardees lecture, but sadly, as my father passed away a few weeks ago, it's a special year for the award, and I'd like to mention a few minutes providing the background to it. As Alan mentioned, the award is for a practice that has made a major contribution towards theory and practice. So in the heated discussions around the judging table with my father, we had to articulate a theory of architectural theory. If you look into architectural education, you see a proliferation of theory, and theory has overtaken history as the necessary complementary medicine to architectural practice. But in this award, we don't define theory as written text in the lineage of Vitruvius or Serlio, nor in the academic architectural theory of the 1960s or 70s, in which architecture was used to illustrate theoretical and philosophical concepts. Instead, we see it in the lineage of Howard Gardner's concept of multiple intelligences. As you know, if you've been here on previous years, Howard Gardner was a developmental psychologist in Harvard who established the theory of emotional intelligences to rid us with the obsession that we seem to have in our society with the IQ, the emotional intelligence quotient, which has been shown to be both racist and misogynistic. Instead, he showed that there are other types of intelligences we all hold: emotional quotient, which is EQ, linguistic, musical, spatial, bodily, graphic, many others. So we see the architects who've won the award over the years as displaying these multiple intelligences. Their practice is always architecture plus something else. plus philosophy for Peter Eisenman, plus painting for Zaha Hadid, plus journalism for Ren Koolhaas, plus watercolours and writing for Stephen Hall, and installations for Neil McLaughlin. This plus is architecture's Siamese twin and allows these architects to separate architectural thinking from architectural practice. And it is partly inspired by my father's Charles's study of Le Corbusier, who painted and sculpted and polemicized. Like him, my father strongly believed in the need for creative space outside of architecture from which to return to architecture, to challenge it. And that challenging architecture trait is endemic to the life of a critic. It is no surprise that that's where my father started his professional life. And nor is it surprising that he became these are not my words, Pope of postmodernism, master celebrant of pluralism, a history professor, architectural designer, artist, landform scraper, zeitgeist chaser, and symbolism diviner, and that he would set up this award to celebrate multiple intelligences. The importance of the theoretical context around architecture is clearly visible in his famous evolutionary diagram of architecture. I couldn't have an image of it tonight, but you all know probably the evolution of architecture, called the Sea of Many Streams. It's a flowing web associating philosophies, swirling around key projects, thinkers, locations, and architectural work. And in that diagram, you see the ecological thinking around architecture, the project in its environment, celebrating many intelligences at one time that are in the architectural profession at the moment. So a couple of words on my father, short words. He was a committed theorist, tying together strands of economic, social, anthropological, art historical, and scientific thinking. And he had theories for everything. Particularly for me was an important one, like why teenagers could sleep longer in the morning. And he would come with scientific papers to back it up. It felt often, unlike most architects who theorize about their architecture, that he architected about his theories. And he chose many different mediums in which to practice that: architecture, furniture, landscape, and art, and perhaps even Maggie's centers, in order to further develop theories and test them in new contexts. Of course, a person with so many arrows to their bow and many academic accomplishments, but no professional license, requires many collaborators. And my father was lucky and charming enough to work with many exciting people. A few of his collaborators were Terry Farrell on his house, which was a postmodernist manifesto, my mother and his wife Louisa on the Garden of Cosmic Speculation, Eddie Heathcote writing about the Maggie Centres, and recently myself and Madelon Riesendorp on his design work. Tonight's winners are also very collaborative. They span the work of academia and practice and work across several disciplines. We'll hear much more about that, but architecture, landscape, and land art. And they're deeply involved with construction issues and thinking through time, scales, and media, which require the use of multiple intelligences too. There's perhaps another relationship between my father and tonight's winners. Charles had a strong and constant desire to find meaning in architecture. It began with his historian's background in literature and developed through his landscape design, where he found the ultimate subject of the work was cosmic speculation. The house that he designed as the postmodern polemic, as well as the house museum, will open as a house museum at the end of next year. He recently rechristened it the Cosmic House, as it is full of symbolism, revelation, and celebration of man's place in the jumping universe. And while tonight's winner probably does not share Charles's mode of symbolic representation, we'll see, I think he believed that their strategy was driven by a shared desire to address and to respond to the elemental question of how to build man's place in the cosmos. So here is David Gloster to introduce tonight's speakers. Thank you.
Good evening. I'm David Gloster. I'm Director of Education at the RIBA and the third and final of the support acts tonight. Thank you all so much for being here to support a unique event and award. As we've heard, the winners of the Jencks Award form a really remarkable group of extremely distinguished architects. I think their work has contributed indelibly to the debate about architecture, the discourse on design, and the pedagogical basis of architecture. When Charles raised an issue, it could never be ignored. And with some contemporary practice, perhaps devoted to rather more corporate objectives, we have again, I think, to thank Charles and the Jencks family for their commitment to supporting the very best values underpinning architectural design. Débora Mesa and Antón García-Abril together form Ensamble Studio. I want to stress this important dependency and interaction. The personal and professional synergies propelling a practice to success aren't always mentioned, yet they're quite fundamental. Different practices and different pedagogical dynamics produce very different thinking. The creative frisson between individuals should catalyse the constructed social art of architecture. And that isn't about being heroic or focused on personalities. It's simply about stressing that architecture is created for real people by other real people. This award is about nothing so much as the qualities of thoughtfulness, of reflection, that distinguish the very best architects and architecture. Charles was always concerned with the soul and vision of the architect, that discrimination in thought and theory that produces the immutable, eternal assets in architecture to make it something which can be revisited and visited again with our bodies and in our heads and always prove rewarding. Well, the process of determining the winners of this award is consistently exciting, and it asks panelists determining the conclusions of the award to have a very clear understanding of each practice nominated and their strengths and weaknesses. And Charles was extremely precise in asking one to articulate one's reasons for nominations. So we would make proposals, we would defend them. Allegiances would shift over the course of a day. The evidence was interrogated and reinterrogated. It was always a demanding discussion. But for this year's winners, those precepts of multiple intelligence that Lily discussed and that Charles saw as so important were most convincingly supported by Ensamble Studio's work. There was a clear consensus that the projects evidenced intellectual inquiry, a gift for origination, and an unusual fascination with and mastery of constructional and technological possibilities, both on and off-site. This love, in fact almost an obsession, with crafting a huge range of materials into spaces where structure is explicit and powerful, surfaces austere but at the same time sensual, and spaces both spectacular and intimate, is read across all Ensemble's projects. And in a world where architectural elements may be shaved to the minimum and value engineered to the margins of a project, Ensemble are unafraid to fight for an architecture of density and mass, whether through their extraordinary virtuosity with precast and in situ concrete, or delving into living rock. Débora, Antón and their colleagues revive and refresh a modernist relish for authentic materiality, structural expression, and for astonishment. We neglect any or all of these qualities at our peril. So together you'll hear them take us through an absorbing range of projects. And this will be followed by an interview of both principals with Paul Finch, the editorial director of the Architects Journal, before the floor is open for your questions. Paul, over the years, shared many platforms with Charles, so he was a natural choice for drawing together those many strands which will emerge from this evening's presentation. So enough from me. Ladies and gentlemen, it gives the RIBA and the RIBA Education a very great pleasure to please welcome Ensemble Studio to the stage. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Charles, for your books, for your earthworks, for your architecture, and for your generosity. This prize that we are so honored to receive, it's all of this. Thank you, Lily, for being here, on all the family, and especially now. And thank you, all the RIBA friends. I feel kind of at home after being honored some years ago as an international fellow. And I want to also very special thank our Ensamble Studio. Ensemble means put things and people together. This is what we have been doing the last 20 years. Very especially Javier Cuesta, who has been our ally, our brother, our partner. And more recently, Borja Soriano, our associate and colleague and friend, and extraordinarily talented partner, close with Álvaro Catalán, Massimo Loya, who are with others, our ensemble that we are so proud of now leading, but that we are all together in this award.
Yes, as you will see, this is certainly a team effort. Also part of the team and present here are our family, our kids, who you will see are great collaborators in many of the works. There's one missing who is studying for college exams in the US, so we send him also the energy from the room. And we want to thank the friends, everybody here, and very especially we want to thank Kathy and Peter Halstead, who are in the room. We were so excited to meet Charles, and we were so excited for them to meet Charles because I think they share a similar spirit. Kathy and Peter, they are artists, incredible visionaries, and they had the courage to commission us a work that you will see tonight, which is Structures of Landscape for Tippett Rice Art Center. And not only did they have the courage to do that, but they gave us incredible freedom to think and to build this work. And freedom is something that is very valuable to the architect, but if we understand how regimented and coded the profession is, we also realize how difficult it is to find this freedom in the daily practice, right? But also if we understand that the architect is not necessarily someone who receives a brief and responds to it, but is somebody who is able to give much more and who is able to identify and respond to topics that we consider are urgent and are relevant, then we realize how important this freedom is. And this is why this prize for us is incredibly meaningful to all the team. And we are so happy and so moved because it, by in a way bringing practice and theory together as something that can not only coexist, but that actually enriches the production of architecture, then architecture can become this field for experimentation and for exploration. When we talked to Charles back in April, we talked with him online, and he was saying what Lily just mentioned tonight, that theory does not need to be written. We completely agree with that, and actually you will see in our lecture how we are constantly asking this question, no? How can we, through the practice of architecture, develop theories? Sometimes theories come before the work. Many times we discover the theories by walking and developing the work.
So we're going to run a video, and this video tells the story of Ensamble Studio, how we have been pursuing theories and developing them in action. How we unconsciously or intuitively decided some paths to push and pull some of these architecture principles that we understand are vertebral and fundamental to architecture, and explore those hidden wrinkles of culture, of architecture, of technology, and connect them into practice.
And in order to understand our approach to architecture, it is very important to understand where we come from, where we started. We were trained as architects in practice almost in Spain, in a country that is very rich in history, in architecture, very rich in practicing architects. And so when we came out of the university, we wanted to build, and we could build. And this is very important because, especially today, the professional realm makes it sometimes very difficult for architects to be able to build, and we consider this is fundamental to receive a training, you know, like the athletes. They need to get fit and learn what it means to translate ideas into built works. No? So,
and here we wanted to discover the origins, the sources, no? the tools, the protocols of where all these come from. So we understood that everything starts with a certain act of abstraction, no? of putting things together that have to be taken out of our environment. And these early games to match all these pieces and parts, put them in order and let them be part of an abstract construct. In this quarry, as an hybrid space between what is natural, what is an industrial setup, with these big tools, we're just warming up all our beliefs and all our thoughts that were seminal and absolutely vertebral in our after practice.
Our early works happened in the north of Spain. There's an Atlantic climate. The presence of a stone is important in the cities like Santiago de Compostela, where we were building. And so getting to better understand the material and see how we could work with it, maybe not necessarily how more contemporary architecture was using the material, but very inspired by all the megalithic architectures that we could find in the landscapes, and also very inspired with this collision between the industrial world, the landscape, the power of the material itself moved us to maybe stay away from more conventional applications of the material and explore new possibilities that we could only realize because we spent a lot of time in the quarries with the quarry people, trying to figure out how to, in this case, use not the final product of the industrial process, but the waste material that this industrial process generates, and that we found had a lot of beauty and a lot of potential, a lot of strength, and was the material that we decided to use and to bring to the city as a reflection of those industrial landscapes that are usually hidden and invisible.
So these early works already contain all the fundamentals that have intrigued us through all our career and still do. How to deal and defy and play with gravity, how mass and weight have been associated historically, but how could we dissociate them to take the best or the required part of each, and how could fundamental aspects of forces and energy that drive our physical environment are relevant for architecture. And always we had the house as our laboratory. We understood that every initiative that started with a built house could contain a full statement of architecture. The Metascopian house was an exercise where we took, synthesized existing industrial parts from infrastructure and civil engineering palette of materials and reused it into a domestic space. We wanted to relieve part of their previous meaning to the material, to the part, and by giving a different order, transform all that into a house.
Yeah, maybe the questions that we were asking ourselves here is how can we take a very standard product that we buy from a supplier, and how by maybe modifying certain parameters in its application, suddenly new possibilities for architecture happen. No? And this is something that we are starting to investigate in this house, but has certainly influenced a lot of the posterior work that we've been doing in the office.
And this project was also built considering automatic script of how all these parts would have to be put together, relying on all this weight and all this gravity in each other's, and trusting into the process of assembly, giving a lot of importance to this, I would say, engineering beauty of putting these pieces and parts together. We were, as Débora was mentioning, also reinventing our practice by being contractors and by being the assemblers, by being a holistical and integral practice that could deliver the full building as the ultimate connection between a theoretical abstract idea and a material practice.
Yeah, with the early projects in Santiago de Compostela, we started to take responsibility of many of the construction aspects. This is the first project in which we become the architects, the developers, and the contractors. No? And by doing this, we also allow ourselves for this space for freedom that I was talking about in the beginning, no? That is so fundamental to maybe test things that have not been tested before, maybe locally, and that many times impedes the architect to find the allies to be able to realize this idea. So we were able to find this model where we could actually, taking also a lot of the risk ourselves, but then be able to test these hypotheses that we had that then, certainly evolve into certain theories about architecture.
And like every project that we have done, there's a part of it that we followed intuitively and a lot of discoveries. This house especially that we have tested because it's our home, our family and friends' home, was for us, I would say a living experience, not only in the construction moment, but also through the testing of daily life. Here we can enjoy lightness, transparency, given by the traces and the actions, the limiting of those presences, those parts, those gravitas that are somehow creating camps of action over the space of the house.
Yeah, in Spain, of course, we have incredible references on the use of precast concrete. If we think about architects like Fernando Higueras or Miguel Fisac or Eduardo Torroja. And so, of course, in our training, in our education as architects, we could see this potential of the material that then when we went out of the university, we also had the opportunity to, in a way, explore further using these huge parts.
So, this project conducted us to the next one, where the challenge was to transform a slaughterhouse into a reader's house. And again, we wanted to express through this encrusted, this transplanted structure, the new space that was revealed as this uneven dissonance, as this collision of differences. The celebration of technology, part of the routine of the theory of how to insert all those bridges through the windows as a fundamental challenge.
Yeah, this project is a mediatheque. It happens in a historic center, in a historic complex in the center of Madrid. So the dialogue with the existing protected building was very important. It is an industrial building built with masonry and with steel. And the exercise is how to introduce the new use, the new square footage that the competition was requesting in conversation, and always not only protecting but even elevating the pre-existing building.
And the discovery, again, is the power of structure, of the presence of a new gravity that we are introducing into the building to really transform it all. I think that this lesson of how structure provides not only the mechanical transmission of loads here and there, but ultimately a fundamental system of order. So while we were sneaking in those rolling 50-ton beams through the windows and crossing the different warehouses, we were observing the total transformation due to this transplant of the given space.
And in a way, by designing not just the concept of this project, but being very engaged in all the methodologies, the construction methodologies, for us it's very important to tie the early ideas of the project, the architectural, spatial, structural, with the actual construction. We believe that when those two coincide, they go in the benefit of the architecture. And you can see how this project is about bridging to existing warehouses. It's about creating these bridges of knowledge, and the way in which we are introducing these bridges through the windows, almost like sewing the spaces and threading these pieces through the windows, not only is actually the most delicate way of touching the building, because we take most of the construction off-site, but it also supports the concept of this new structure almost very lightly entering the building and becoming part of its new being.
And again, we express this fascination of technology, how a maneuver could be orchestrated to become the soul of the building, this injected, almost forced a presence that made the dialogue between the new and the old, the new inserted structure versus the old, that even though, as I mentioned, they do not touch each other, they pretty much reject each other, they collaborate and they work together in this new space for the readers that we promoted.
Yeah, and a bit like it happened in the Meroscopion house, where we actually discover how transparent and open and light a space can feel, even if it's built with very heavy parts. This same effect, we were looking for it, and we found it with the Reader's House. No? And through these two works also, we start to get more confident, and we start to understand what off-site construction, what these technologies can bring to architecture, and these, in a way, promote a research that brings us back maybe to the scale of infrastructure where we start to develop new concepts of operating in the city and operating in the structures that build the cities, like the high-rise buildings, for example, that are usually very introvert and very opaque. And we try to bring some of the intelligence or some of the knowledge that we acquired building these two works into these research projects.
So this intellectual games that have to do with the infrastructural three-dimensionality of the urban, an old obsession of architects, is now developed through our practice in different research slash academic slash practice projects. Here is where the potential of an abstract idea can really be pushed. And we are still working in this range of projects, trying to understand the logics, the tectonic, the language, and the opportunities to explore through the technology of pre-stressed concrete a new way of living in the city.
Yeah, once more thinking already more applied to these large-scale projects, how the standard parts that we usually as architects build with and that make even more sense when you are building larger structures, how can we introduce difference and variation and still make projects that are constructively viable, and by also thinking about very efficient ways of building, maybe be able to make these more bold concepts happen within the same budgets.
So 7 years ago, we moved to the United States, invited by MIT to develop our research lab. And all the agenda that we had previously deployed through our practice could be boosted and shared with a larger intellectual and scientific community. So what we took was our backpack of theories and ideas and challenged them. The first one was, let's, like in this prototype that we've seen now, let's try to erase the mass from the structures, maintaining all the gravitas, all the weight, all the Vitruvian fundamental presence of a part. So we actually exercised this theory with a couple of prototypes in our lab that opened our appetite and a strong desire to extract all this into practice immediately.
Yeah, by being the contractors of some of the previous work, we realized also some of the limitations of working with very heavy materials. So we put ourselves almost in the opposite situation of trying to work with very light materials, keeping some of the values of off-site construction, but seeing what that implies and what that means. What it means is what you're seeing right now, which is that we can actually build much easily with our hands almost. We are building these prototypes as if they were models. So there's, let's say, a more direct engagement in this construction, and makes it easier to develop the research, not depending necessarily on a precast concrete specialist. In this case, we are fabricating the pieces ourselves. Of course, using a lot of the logics of precast concrete, and you can see clearly the relation between this beam that we are lifting and the Meroscopium house precast concrete beams. Is just the reduction of the weight changes radically the rules of the game.
What happens when architecture loses its mass and maintains the force that boosts the space in a classical, canonical way? Well, we needed to get out of the lab as soon as possible and, again, connect with with the practice. So we took this opportunity to build our house, our home office in Boston, and also explore a new variable of theoretical and technological challenge. Let's build in Spain and assembly in the United States.
Yeah, once more, the house, our house, becomes this incredible opportunity to push the research a bit further, because always operating in the realm of codes and legal frameworks challenges the research and the intellectual ideas that you can have within the lab. So this was a very important moment where, and you will recognize some of our team here, building, because as architects and not as a specialist in construction, we were building these structures ourselves that needed to be very light, because that was what the research was about, certainly, but also because we were building on top of an existing construction, and because we were shipping the parts from Spain to the US. And this had two reasons. One, to really validate this idea about lightness, but certainly it was also a very practical need. We found ourselves, as many American families, middle-income families, we found the difficulty of being able to build a home at a reasonable price. And of course, we could take advantage of being architects, of having our team in Spain, and we could manage that problem, which is a huge problem in many cities, and in a way produce this house for ourselves, which is already starting to think about affordability in housing in the American context.
So the accumulated experience of being builders, of being manufacturers now, and being capable to understand the full problem of doing a building drove us to this, I would say, impossible mission, no? of turning this old garage into precious space that could also open, and has opened, a new way of understanding construction, opening the range of distribution and delivery of these parts, and also opening to us a full universe of defining a custom-made piece that could create our alphabet, our own set of parts that could be assembled custom, not taking just the I-beam or the U-beam as a given and interpreting it, but being capable to fabricate and to produce this new vocabulary of parts.
Yeah, knowing how difficult it is to be disruptive in the construction industry, which is usually very stubborn. It's very difficult to do things differently or introduce certain levels of innovation. What it's very exciting for us about this research is that actually we are using very conventional materials, very normal. These are materials that are used in many countries to build drywalls or to build different kinds of structures and elements. So it's something that any contractor would be able to relate to. But of course we are, let's say the innovation part is in how we are reorganizing these materials to produce new forms of architecture, but then also how we are understanding the whole logistic and construction process towards efficiency, and once more oriented towards how to reduce the cost of construction so that these innovations can happen.
And ultimately, the theory inspires technology and produces new languages. By being in transition from weight to lightness, we consider that the Aristotelic equilibrium is really where architecture is. And we understood that these hybrid structures that are ultralight, pre-manufactured, assembled dry, and transformed in this process into a stiff, robust, heavy structure that ultimately gives the life to the building. We understood that all this was part of an intellectual itinerary that needed the prior exercises to be built, experienced, to arrive to the conclusions where we are at now. And those conclusions have also invited us to move our environment of practice from the office to a fabrica, to a place where prototypes and parts are designed, engineered, and produced, giving the ultimate connection between the theory and the instruction that transforms data to matter, a theory into practice.
Yeah, for us, this constant dialogue between what we are speculating with, what we are thinking, and being able to materialize or to find a reaction working with the actual materials and building these prototypes has become throughout the years a modus operandi. And what you were seeing is the new office space, which is this factory space where we can build bigger models and bigger prototypes. And the ideas that are born from our small experiment be tested at other scales.
And from the part to the kit to the assembly protocols, this novel way of understanding architecture has to be compatible with all the design fundamentals that sometimes the redundancy of the prefabrication industry negated. And this is where we're at after all this long itinerary that started with the interpretation of an I-beam. And now we would like to evocate again the origin of matter, the land, the earth, in a technological and poetical evocation that started with, again, a small hut, a small home that initiated our way of establishing, I would say, a different relationship between architecture and landscape to the prior imposing architectural one that we have sometimes observed.
The house that we are going to present, the chapel house, happens almost simultaneously to the Emeroscopion house. They're both built with concrete, but they are actually very different because of the way in which they understand the context and how the material is used. In this case, the exercise being in a very rural, wild, magnificent landscape, we want to subdue ourselves to the rules and the materials of that specific landscape. And the whole exercise and the whole experiment that this building is about how can we take the ingredients that are around us, earth, hay bales, the cow of the neighbor, mix them with concrete and produce an architectural space that we want it to be born from the land. And we want to see what that means, what kind of a space that creates, and if it really suddenly is something that refers back to the land where it was casted and earthed.
So like in other occasions, we set up a team. We really didn't know what were going to be the consequences of our actions, but we put all those actions on the field, congregated all those set of materials that we have gathered and removed from the field, and initiate a technological sequence of additive layering, manufacturing, pretty much simulating a 3D printer in the way of the logic of a low-resolution matter stacking system. This became a new way of understanding the relationship between a constructed building with the nature, and we discovered that even though architecture was not yet being revealed, there was already a bit of a soul of the earth that we have been transforming.
I think also becoming the developers of some of these smaller works has been critical to, in a way, try to develop this work with a small budget means that we need to select very strategically what are we building with and what are the resources that we are using it and how we are using it. And part of the ingenuity of some of this process comes from this effort of trying to eliminate anything that is not necessary. In this case, using the earth and the hay bales as formwork is not only a tool to control this whole process and to avoid very expensive scaffolding, but it is actually looking for this chemical reaction between the pressure between these very different materials and spirits in the matter.
And ultimately, we wanted to tell a fabulous story about nature with architecture, how the time of nature is slow and requires the pose and the pace and the beats of nature to consolidate its prints, its actions, as opposed to the automation and speedy scripted logic of assembling. In this case, time was taking care of the truffle, and it was leaving part of its print on its interior walls or petrified as a liquid evocation of the sea in the lintel, or all through all those wrinkles and aged surfaces due to the actions of operating with the materials and the time of the earth.
And what's very interesting about this work and the research that continues afterwards is that although there is always an element of discovery in architecture when it goes from a design to a construction, in this case, in the way that the process is scripted and the work happens, that discovery is, that level of uncertainty and therefore discovery is even bigger because we're not designing up to the last wrinkle and we're not designing all of the details. And so the textures and a bit of the ornamentation that we discover when we reveal and we extract the earth and the hay in this work is something that, of course, is the result of a process, but is something that to us comes as something that we are seeing for the first time.
And here the concrete becomes natural matter, and it's expressed in a different way. Of course, it has a certain constructiveness in those prints, or it can contain all those traces of the earth on the exterior walls. But ultimately, it's the binder of all these natural differences that reacts positively with the land and is transforming into architecture. I have to say that this building was built in parallel to the Meroscopian house and opened these two paths of research that we have been since exploring. The truffle stayed on a calm almost for 10 years until we got invited by Peter and Kathy to think about how to operate with the land in an amazing landscape of the West North America in Montana.
Yeah, the exercise here was to imagine how an art center could coexist and how, in a way, nature could be brought together with art and architecture without losing any of the incredible values that this landscape has, especially for people like us who came from the city, suddenly landing in this place of an infinite sky rolling hills, very small presence of the print of human beings was overwhelming and absolutely inspirational.
So the reference was a constellation of parts that had been designed with a different attitude. We were so inspired by the need of reinvention and the need of connection with the earth that we tried to disrupt and break all the architectonic ideas that we had previously known.
Yeah, the process of design learns from the geology of the place, that it's very active and very powerful. And so we are trying to, once more, like it happened in the truffle, absorb as much as we can from that land and try to produce an architecture that, in a way, is reacting to the laws that are not imposed in this case by urban infrastructures, but the laws that come from this land where the architecture is going to sit.
And again, we are using the materiality of the site. We were taking the elements available, mixing them with concrete, and putting them in the canvas of a bed of sand to keep and touch the land, where we could carve those prints and after celebrate the gravitas of this birth of architecture by unearthing, by celebrating the effort and the monumental weights that have to be deployed to make this event of architecture blossom and born.
Yeah, in this case, once more, we want this architecture to belong to the land and to be reclaimed by the land after we finish its construction. And so the whole process of almost casting it in the earth is part of this idea that the architecture is born from it and then it will belong and be transformed by it.
And the technology was serving ultimately the poetic and architectonic ideas. We want to share with you the atmosphere, the poetic ambient that ultimately makes this communion between art, space, architecture, and the land.
Este
So this project is about how we can enable this land to be inhabited without intruding it, and how architecture can establish very strong contacts and dialogues, and in a way benefit from these dialogues with art and with nature. And this work in a way continued a research that has had the truffle and structures of landscape as moment of crystallization, of testing of the ideas, and that we continue to work in order to understand what is happening, and to, in a way, push the exploration to other horizons and other territories.
We do believe that the research mission is not done. All these projects are pushing us to explore this relationship between uncertainty through the creative process with total control of the engineering construct. We think that abstract expressionism has not yet arrived to architecture, and ultimately this is the connection of space with our own, I would say, spiritual and humane condition. And we want to develop the tools, the processes, and the language of the architecture of the earth. All these prior exercises have been instructing us and driving us through a certain path, and the story continues. We are sharing with you our exercising of this architecture, where geometries subdue to matter, where the equilibrium is based in more complex encounters than the Euclidean connected parts.
Yes, I think this research, that part of it we were developing this summer after the experience of doing structures of landscape, that continues to feed back into us, shows, how are we continue to think about this, and of course, always having the chance to materialize these and build these is very important, combined with all the training and all the research that happens.
And this also has conducted us, pushed us to Canterra, the house of the earth. I would say a fruit that we found hidden in the guts of the earth, an abandoned mine that we took as ultimate expression of the architecture of the earth that we believe in.
Yeah, we also think that the architect has the capacity and the sensibility, and also the responsibility in a way to look at different contexts, and also recognize the value and work with that value. Maybe this last project that we are going to share with you is precisely about that. It's about observation, it's about recognition, and about in a way restoring the value to a place that is already there. And it's also about measuring our actions. How much do we need to do?
And these actions, these traces, these incorporations to a given space that was found are fundamentally symbolic, but somehow they celebrate, again with the technology, how architecture can certainly transform the landscape, and how can the space appear even in the most abandoned or distant places. Just by the presence of gravity, by the illumination of the energy of light and the air flowing in. And with this first and last stone, the symbolic appearance of architecture. I think this was the message and the performance that we wanted to execute in that space as the only action that could transform a full given quarry into an habitable space.
And this action also relates to the history and to the character of this space that was carved to extract the material, like almost in the first quarry that we were showing you in the beginning. But this one has an interior space and can be inhabited. So we are using the same logics to carve light into it, but then the rest of the actions are just about cleaning and erasing those elements that do not belong to the space, to the industrial logic with which it was carved. And then it's also a project that we need to experience, to in a way reacquaint ourselves with basic aspects of architecture that we sometimes forget, and that here are very present, like natural light, natural ventilation, humidity. In a way, the ingredients are all there, and we just need to be very sensible in how to use them.
And this drives us back to those fundamentals of architecture. We think that we are, after 20 years of practice, da capo all'origine. This origin that took us again to a quarry to discover gravity and light and to understand that architecture relies in a print that we leave in the environment, and that this is fundamentally our responsibility. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Well, I can confidently say that first that was a tour de force. I don't think I've seen films of architectural creation and delivery as well kind of accumulated in this room. And I think the reaction from the audience is a tribute to that. And I think it's very plain why you won the RIBA Charles Jencks Award, because so many of the themes that he was involved with and almost obsessed by have almost effortlessly come through in aspects of your own work. As I was watching the films, the question of gravity came up a lot. A lot of your work is it's about compression rather than tension. It's very rooted. And I wonder from that point of view whether you feel more comfortable in city environments and doing buildings that are sort of tight in their urban context and have to fight for space and justify their height, or whether actually you feel more comfortable when you can have that same compression and gravity, but in surroundings that are entirely free and open.
I think we enjoy both, and I think both are part of the same balance. So some projects, because they happen in very, very different contexts and the rules of the game are very different, they produce, in a way, different habitats. And for us, that's the richness of architecture, no? That you can actually operate in these different and very complex realms that are constantly enriching and acknowledging, in a way, each other.
Débora and I have the same voice, and we play piano for hand. So I just have to add that that even though our vision of the world might seem to be polarized into two realities, the reality of the magmatic, informal, low-resolution nature versus the systemic, automatic, and pre-manufactured assembly of the city as a construct. We believe, and this I think is one of the main motivations of our research and practice, that there will be connections. The same way there's a connected desire in our spirits to be part of both. I think architecture somehow has to respond in that link between both.
Yes, I think this came across very clearly that much of your work has this hybrid element, so that even in Montana, in the middle of nowhere, actually you're still using techniques which would be quite familiar in the city. I suppose the other thing that arose, I felt this, although you didn't say it, that when you're working on art projects, that somehow there's almost a sort of release that openness allows you to explore hybridity, if that's a word, in a kind of more open manner. And I wonder if is there a sort of sense in which the art is your heart and the structures are your head?
Well, I think that as we said in the beginning, creativity and liberty are synonymous in an expressive practice, either art or architecture. And we have so far maintained and defended these liberties. By the way, they're no easy, and that gives us also, the clues and the instructions. These liberties also dictates how we have to leave others and other parts and systems and materials participate in that freedom. And this enriches the creativity. Freedom with the engineering control is part of the game of architecture. So we try to understand that in all the process of the discipline of architecture, from an abstract conception to a precise delivery, we have to play with this parameter of freedom as a very relevant parameter.
And Débora, as another sort of hybrid is this combination of theory and practice. And I was very struck by, on the one hand, your research and your theoretical work can then lead to buildings, but on the other hand, the work itself may be a form of research. Now, this has been very difficult in architecture, this question about what research is, but you seem pretty clear that it can come from either end of the telescope, as it were. You don't worry about that. You just take it as you find it and move on. Is this acceptable in American theoretical circles, or do you have a criticism that actually you really shouldn't build anything until you kind of theorized it first?
No, I think in the U.S. Context where we have been very present in the last 6-7 years, there's a great welcoming and a great need, I think, for architecture that in a way brings theory together with it, and I think that experimentation, although it is hard to actually do it within the framework of practice, when it gets done, it is praised. I mean, it is welcomed, and it is. I think that there is certainly an acceptance. No, it's we have not found a rejection at all of the work that we do. What is very difficult is to actually find those spaces within practice. That's why, we in a way we're able to create our own microcosm where we don't depend of a commission to be able to move ideas and to try to push them. But of course, when those ideas join bigger conversations and bigger visions, and they can be enjoyed by larger communities, then for us, that's the highest point architecture can touch. Only that it's not always possible. You need to find brave clients and brave allies, and we are able to figure out what to do up to a certain scale. But there are other ideas that if we don't find the proper allies, they won't happen, because we simply cannot assume all the conditions that those impose.
Well, I did think this presentation is a suitable riposte to the old kind of line about, well, it works in practice, but does it work in theory? And I think you kind of given the sort of double answer to that proposition. I'm going to throw things open to the floor in just a moment. So if you have a question or a comment, please raise your hand, and there'll be a roving mic in the general way. The other thing I wanted to ask was this ability to almost kind of in your domestic projects to make kind of adventure playgrounds, whether it's tiny at the Truffle or whether it's in either of your homes, either in the States or in Spain. And I wonder whether you take the view that doing a large project is just a scaled up version of a small project, or actually if they're really two different things.
Well, that's what intrigues us also. And we actually feel that after almost 20 years of active practice, we are in a, I would say, starting point. We have so far curated our tools, our abilities, and our teams to arrive to those two spaces that we shared with you: Canterra, the House of the Earth, a very inspiring landscape laboratory, and La Fábrica as a place where practice is extended into the undeveloped yet dialogue between architecture and automation and robotics. We think that this will give the possibility to these ideas to perform in a larger scale and venture. And ultimately, this is our ambition, and the reason we've been doing exercises all these years to develop with larger impacts, not only in the poetical and cultural, academic and research ambience that we are very happy to have been actively involved with, but also in larger, let's say, social scenarios. So we are confident, answering your question sharply, that there's a continuity and there's not a limit in terms of the scale of how ideas architecture can be developed.
Thank you. Any questions from the audience? Yes, please. There's a mic coming.
Is there a mic? Oh.
Yeah.
Oh. Even better. Now I'm in for an hour. It seems that in the beginning, people lived in the Acropolis, the Parthenon, Petra, in environments that were there. And today we have the idea of lost cities, the idea of extraordinary discoveries of places that where people used to live, Machu Picchu, where they no longer live. And today we live in cities, we live in places where people couldn't live, because architecture empowers us to live anywhere we want with electricity and the internet and so on. But in a way, it seems that part of your quest, and with the discovery of the Can Terra in Menorca, these extraordinary quarries that go back to the first quarry in Santiago de Compostela, where you made that extraordinary Stonehenge-like thing out of blocks of stone that are really made in a way, I guess, that goes back thousands of years. So it seems to me that you're on a quest to, as you say, da capo, to find at the end of the rainbow the way that people used to live, because the land dictated it, not because they could with modern architecture, but because what the land told them was so miraculous that they had to live there, such as, in the desert, in various Bedouin places with extraordinary rock formations, obviously the pyramids in Giza and so on. These are amazing environments. I'm sorry, I'll stop. But is this true? Is this something that you're seeking, this kind of quest to go back to the beginning?
Well, yes. Yes. I think there's a desire of humanity to find a way to have a fair dialogue with the habitat. We see this in the environmental challenge that we are facing, and how the habitat that starts from our room, like Can Terra as a room, or to a greater system, has to find a way. So either we push what we already have to somewhere else, or with our intelligence, our multiple intelligences, the usage of technology and a free mind and soul, we could somehow restart. Can Terra might be a symbolic space of this birth, even though we used the most advanced technology to interpret that origin, that fruit. But we do think that there's something that architecture can give by starting again.
Thank you. Let's take another one. Yes, just here. There's a mic coming.
Hi. I've been following your work for quite some time, and I saw this freedom in your work, and I always wondered how hard it was for you to get it done in the first place with your first project. Because I believe that once that gets realized, that open opportunities to express your freedom even more. So what were your challenges, and how did you convince your client to take this kind of risk and have this courage to push this through?
Well, Débora, I think it was said that you had the advantage of actually being able to build right from the beginning, because the circumstances of the time in Spain meant you were able not only to build but get actively involved in the process of construction.
Yeah, there was a great system of competitions where you didn't need to prove you had built 3 or 4 buildings of the same kind previously, so it was really meant for young architects to practice, which is what we really are missing in general today. And this is a problem, because if you arrive, at a late age and you start building, you've missed a lot of years of, exercising. And of course, there have been incredible architects who have started to build very late, but it's not the ideal situation. But for us, it was that opportunity. Also in our team, Antón and myself, and Borja, and Álvaro, and Massimo, they are architects, but Javier is a building engineer. And so he keeps us all building, in a way, no? So, and this is very important, because I actually learned to build with him, like gluing myself to him and moving from one place to another. And so we would be doing competitions that allowed us to, and we were lucky to win a few. I mean, Antón and Javier, they won a couple already when I arrived to the office, and then, we were already on track. We had built a little bit with the first project that we were showing here tonight. That's when we decided to, because we were doing things like this stone wall, recycling material from the quarry. That's not what you're supposed to do. And it was very hard to find a contractor who would really want to do that. Even for us, it made total sense. What's this material sitting in the quarry? Nobody wants it, but it's so amazing. So that's when we decided we either kill the concept or we become the contractors. And that was a changing moment in our profession, because of course it required a lot of courage and risk, because when you do a turnkey project, you sign a price, you decide what the building is going to be, and if something goes wrong, you are assuming all that. No? So we were very certain and very sure, and we were willing to take that risk. And from then on, this opened this world of possibilities to us, where we were not dependent on a commission necessarily to produce work. And then some of the most important works for us, like the Truffle, the Meroscopium House, happened because of our own initiative, and have built that training that then have enabled us to respond to other contexts and other works, sometimes with clients, no? That of course we love to work with.
It's the third part of the three-legged stool, isn't it? It's theory and practice and delivery, which is the distinctive mark of the work. We'll take one more question, if there is one. Yes, please.
As we're in London, and we're also remembering your a brief point you made about building as a city dweller in Montana, I'm wondering how your theory exposed in the projects you've done so far affects us in the urban world, the city.
Well, I think that any architecture statements might seem distant in different contexts or places, but they are all intimately related. And I think what we did in Montana has consequences in different places. I don't know if in London, but at least through our practice, that we are somehow pushing all those inertias into other places, it's already being extended, and therefore connecting places that would have never been connected. The same way Costa da Morte in Galicia was connected to Fishtail, Montana. No? There was a cosmic connection, and that is driven by those principles, those invariants, those fundamental aspects of architecture. There's nothing intrinsically vernacular or enclosed or reserved to a place. I think architecture, the grand architecture, refers universally.
Yeah, and I think a project like Montana, for example, one of the questions it brings is, when is it architecture? No? Because many times it is read as an art piece, when it's not inhabited, it becomes part of the, let's say, art constellation in the ranch. When suddenly it becomes a shelter, it starts to get its meaning like architecture. Sometimes because of its rocky nature, it seems like if it was part of that landscape. We love that ambiguity, and we think that ambiguity is important so that we don't get stuck with categories. For us, what is also makes us reflect about is how much do you need to do. No? And of course, this is a very different context, as if we were in an urban context. The climate is super extreme. The conditions of the project were very different from others that we have worked. But then it also forces us to think, something that we also feel when we see the Neolithic architectures in the north of Galicia that have been reclaimed by nature. We see the structures of landscape in Montana, and we know that nature is already appropriating them, and they accept that, and that's fine. So when we think about works in the city, now we think about those things as well. No? How, what's the lifespan of this building? And prefabrication actually makes a lot of sense in that discussion, no? Because when you think about things that can be assembled and disassembled, you start to think about times and about how things emerge, but then also how they can be dismantled and be something else. No? So for us, these works help us when we are working in very different domains, even if the conditions are sometimes even antagonistic.
I think that's a lovely note to end on. I think Charles, Jencks, not Prince Charles, would have really enjoyed this evening. I once said to him, I think it was after actually a presentation about the jumping universe in this very room, I said to him afterwards that I had known a lot of architects with a theory problem, but I thought Charles was a theorist with an architecture problem, which I think he quite liked. And I suppose this evening, to use one of your own phrases, the whole presentation, performance and choreography has been a constellation of parts. And it has had its cosmic moments, and it certainly had an attitude to land art, to earth, to history. And those sort of hybrid combinations of small and large, and fast and slow, and art and architecture. And it's sometimes said, it's T.S. Eliot said that poets are the antennae of the race. They divine things more quickly than anybody. And they have, of course, the advantage of being able very rapidly to turn intuition and feeling into work. The theory goes, if it is a theory, that it's then musicians from whom the kind of zeitgeist begins to emerge, and almost inevitably, because architecture is a slow business and quite often a collaborative, well, it's always a collaborative business, though you've done your very best to make sure that the client is not absolutely essential on all projects other than yourselves. But what I thought we saw this evening via the films was actually a combination. We had poetry, and we had music, and we had art, and we had architecture, we had earth, and we had landscape, which has made this, I think, a very, very complete evening. So in congratulating you and the whole of Ensemble, I'd like to invite the audience to show their profound appreciation for a wonderful experience. Thank you.